The night smelled of expensive perfume and jet fuel. The sleek silver body of Damien Torres's private jet gleamed under the floodlights of the secluded runway. It was close to midnight, and only a handful of people were allowed near the aircraft. 2 bodyguards in black suits stood at the bottom of the staircase, while a flight attendant in crisp uniform rushed to prepare champagne for the billionaire and his mistress. Damien emerged first. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tuxedo unbuttoned and his tie dangling loose around his neck. His grin was smug, the grin of a man who thought the world belonged to him. Just a few hours earlier, he had been at an elite charity gala, raising glasses with CEOs and politicians. But the real highlight of his night wasn't the million-dollar pledges or the applause he received on stage. It was the woman now stepping out of the limousine behind him. Sienna Cruz, 25, a model-turned-assistant who had clawed her way into Damien's life with painted nails and sharp ambition. She wore a glittering red dress that clung to her body like liquid fire. Her laughter rang out across the tarmac, shrill and taunting, as she leaned on Damien's arm. To her, this wasn't just a late-night getaway. This was a coronation. She was walking toward that jet as if it were a throne, certain she had replaced the woman who once stood at Damien's side. But fate had other plans. A second car pulled up just as Damien and Sienna reached the foot of the stairs. Its headlights cut across the runway, startling the guards. Out stepped Elena Torres. She was 6 months pregnant, her hand instinctively resting on the curve of her belly. She wasn't dressed for glamour. No jewels, no designer gowns, just a simple maternity dress, navy blue, with a light shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was loose, her face pale but resolute. The exhaustion of sleepless nights and quiet tears clung to her, yet there was something unshakable in her eyes. For a brief second, silence swallowed the runway. Damien froze. He hadn't expected her here. Not tonight. Not at his jet. Elena? His voice cracked, an unfamiliar note of panic threading through his arrogance. The flight attendant stopped mid-step, champagne flutes trembling on the tray. Even the guards exchanged uneasy glances. Elena's voice was steady. I needed to see with my own eyes, to look at the man I married, the father of my child, and see who he really is. The words cut sharper than any blade. Sienna smirked, unbothered. She had been waiting for this confrontation, rehearsing it in her head like an actress before opening night. She wanted Elena humiliated. She wanted the wife erased. Well, Sienna said, her tone dripping with venom, now you've seen him, and you can see me too, standing right where you used to. She stepped closer, eyes glittering with triumph. You should have stayed home, darling. Pregnant women need their rest. Elena didn't move, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes locked on Damien. For the first time, Damien couldn't meet her gaze. He looked down, ashamed, or maybe simply afraid. Sienna's smirk widened, and then in a move so shocking it stunned everyone present, she reached out and grabbed Elena's hair. Gasps erupted. The flight attendant nearly dropped the tray. The guards tensed, unsure whether to intervene. You pathetic little thing, Sienna hissed, yanking Elena's head back. Still clinging to a man who doesn't want you. Do you think your baby makes you special? Do you think it makes you untouchable? Elena stumbled but kept her balance, her hands instinctively going to her stomach to protect her unborn child. Her face contorted in pain, but her voice, when it came, was unbreakable. You don't scare me, Sienna. You never will. The tension on the runway crackled like a live wire. Damien barked, "Enough!" and tried to pry Sienna off, but the mistress only tightened her grip, feeding on the humiliation she was inflicting. The scene was chaos, and yet it felt like the entire world had shrunk down to that one moment. The billionaire, his mistress, his pregnant wife, and the jet that symbolized his arrogance. And then, out of the shadows, a figure stepped forward. A man in a tailored suit, carrying a briefcase. His presence was calm, deliberate, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment. It was Lucas Vega, Elena's lawyer. His voice cut through the madness, low but commanding. "Take your hands off my client." Sienna froze, startled by the authority in his tone. Damien's eyes widened in disbelief. He had known Lucas for years, had hired him once for business contracts. But now, Lucas wasn't standing on his side. He was standing with Elena. The guards instinctively stepped back. The flight attendant clutched the tray to her chest. Even the hum of the jet engines seemed to fade. Elena slowly straightened, her hair disheveled, her shoulders trembling, but her eyes locked with Lucas's. In that instant, something shifted. She was no longer the fragile wife begging for scraps of affection. She was a woman backed by the force of law, by undeniable evidence, by a resolve that had been born out of betrayal. Lucas raised the briefcase. Damien Torres, everything you've hidden, every account, every hotel receipt, every photograph, it's all here. Tonight, this charade ends. The color drained from Damien's face. Sienna released Elena's hair, her bravado slipping. The runway, moments ago a stage for Damien's pride, had transformed into a courtroom. And the verdict was about to be read. Because by the time this jet leaves the ground, Lucas said, his eyes cold and steady, you'll already be a divorced man. Elena Torres had once been the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. Not because she flaunted wealth or status, but because of the quiet warmth she carried with her. She was 29, an architect who used to sketch entire cityscapes in her college notebooks, dreaming of one day designing buildings that would touch the sky. She had been talented, ambitious, and full of life. Her professors believed she was destined for greatness. But when she met Damien Torres, her life took a different path. She was 23, fresh out of university, balancing 2 part-time jobs while working toward her architect's license. He was 30, already making waves in private aviation, a man who seemed larger than life with his expensive suits and confident smile. He noticed her at a charity art auction. Elena hadn't even planned on attending. She was filling in for a friend who couldn't make it. But fate placed her in the same room as Damien. He approached her like a storm. You have the kind of eyes that make people believe in second chances, he had told her, as though it were the most natural opening line in the world. Elena had laughed, brushing it off, but that night, something about him drew her in. He was charming, persuasive, the kind of man who made promises with a conviction that made you want to believe him. 6 months later, she had given up her tiny apartment and her independence to move into his penthouse. A year after that, they were married. She told herself it was love, that Damien saw something in her worth cherishing. What she didn't realize then was that she was slowly erasing pieces of herself to fit into the mold of his glamorous life. Her days shifted from sketching designs in crowded coffee shops to planning Damien's galas, entertaining his investors, and maintaining an image of perfection. The architect who once dreamed of skyscrapers was reduced to drawing up seating charts. But Elena didn't complain. She loved him. She wanted to build a family with him. And when she discovered she was pregnant, she thought, finally, this was the turning point. This was when Damien would come back to her. Grounded, responsible, the man she believed he could be. At first, Damien seemed thrilled. He placed his hand on her belly every night, whispering promises about the child's future. He insisted he would be the best father. But slowly, those promises thinned into excuses. He began working late, traveling more, and when he was home, his phone was always in his hand. Elena learned to recognize the subtle changes, the faint cologne that wasn't hers, the smudges of lipstick on his shirt collar, the evasive explanations that never quite made sense. Still, she held on. She told herself it was stress, that building an empire was exhausting. She told herself he would return to her once the baby arrived. She wanted to believe. She needed to believe. Because the alternative, that the man she had sacrificed her career for, the man she had given her heart and body to, was betraying her, was too devastating to accept. But whispers grew into truths she could no longer ignore. One night, as Damien claimed to be closing a deal in Chicago, a friend sent Elena a photograph. Damien, in his tailored suit, standing in a rooftop bar in Manhattan, with Sienna Cruz on his arm. The young assistant was laughing up at him, her hand splayed across his chest, as though she already owned him. Elena stared at that picture until her vision blurred. She remembered placing her hand on her belly that night, whispering to her unborn child, "I don't know how to protect you from this." Her health began to suffer. Morning sickness stretched into all-day sickness. Her blood pressure rose. Her doctor told her she needed rest, less stress, more support. But at home, support was nowhere to be found. Damien was either absent or distant, treating her questions like inconveniences. "Don't be dramatic, Elena," he would snap before retreating into his office. Alone in that penthouse, Alina began to wither. She would sit in the nursery she had decorated herself, soft cream walls, tiny folded clothes in the dresser, and wonder if she had made the worst mistake of her life. Nights were the hardest. The city lights glittered outside the windows, mocking her isolation. She would cry quietly into her pillow, holding her belly as though the child inside could absorb her love and shield her from despair. But even in her lowest moments, something inside Alina refused to break. She had given up her career, her independence, her dreams, but she would not give up her dignity. Not completely. She began writing in her old sketchbooks again, not buildings this time, but letters to her baby. Letters full of hope, promises that even if Damien failed them, she never would. It was during one of those sleepless nights that she called Lucas Vega. He had once been Damien's lawyer, but Lucas had always shown Alina a quiet respect that others in Damien's circle never did. He listened as she poured her heart out, as she admitted she felt trapped, humiliated, and powerless. Lucas's voice was calm, steady. "You are not powerless, Alina. You have more strength and more rights than you realize." That single phone call planted a seed. For the first time in months, Alina allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't just Damien's neglected wife. A future where she was strong enough to stand alone, strong enough to fight for her child. But fate doesn't wait for you to be ready. Just as Alina began to gather her courage, the confrontation she had dreaded arrived sooner than expected. Damien didn't even bother hiding it anymore. He flaunted Sienna at parties, at dinners, and photographs that splashed across society blogs. The humiliation was unbearable. And yet, through the tears, Alina's resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let Sienna erase her. She wasn't going to let Damien destroy her. She was going to face them, face him, even if it meant walking straight into the fire. And that was how, on that fateful night, Alina Torres found herself standing on the runway, 6 months pregnant, watching her husband and his mistress board a jet. She hadn't gone there to beg. She hadn't gone there to fight. She had gone there to reclaim her voice, her dignity, and her future. What she didn't know was that the moment Sienna's hand tangled in her hair, the course of her life and Damien's empire would change forever. The private jet was Damien Torres's crown jewel, a flying palace in the sky. Whenever he wanted to show investors his power, he didn't bring them to boardrooms or skyscrapers. He brought them here, to his jet, his floating empire, his proof that he had risen from a modest background to become a man who owned the very air he flew through. On the outside, the jet gleamed under the floodlights like a silver dagger, sharp and untouchable. Its name, Aurora, was etched in gold on the side. It wasn't just transportation, it was a stage where Damien displayed his wealth and authority. Every inch of it screamed luxury. The sleek chrome staircase, the red carpet rolled out across the tarmac, the bottles of Cristal already chilling inside. For Damien, this wasn't just a night away from his pregnant wife. It was a performance, a declaration that he could have anything and anyone he wanted. Inside, the cabin was a world apart. Cream-colored leather seats lined the aisles, each one softer than most people's beds. Crystal sconces glowed warmly along the walls. A mahogany bar at the back was stocked with rare whiskey and imported wines. Even the carpeting had been custom-made in Italy, dyed a shade of midnight blue that seemed to shimmer under the soft lighting. It was an atmosphere designed to intoxicate. And Sienna Cruz thrived in it. She strutted through the cabin with her stilettos clicking against the floor, her laughter echoing like a victory anthem. To her, this was more than a jet. It was proof that she had succeeded, that she had stolen not just Damien's attention, but his world. The flight attendants had been trained to smile no matter what, but even they exchanged subtle glances as Damien pulled Sienna into his lap in one of the wide seats, kissing her neck while murmuring about Paris, Milan, and all the places they would fly together. They didn't ask about Elena. They didn't dare. Their job was to serve champagne and pretend they were blind. But outside, just beyond the glass windows, the real storm was approaching. Elena stood on the runway, her shawl fluttering in the night breeze, staring at the glowing cabin that had once been hers to board. She had traveled in that jet before, sitting quietly beside Damien, holding his hand, believing she belonged in that world. Now, it was a fortress that had shut her out. The setting wasn't just lavish, it was suffocating. Every detail reminded Elena of the life she had given up her career for. She remembered late nights sketching while Damien had promised, "One day, I'll give you the world." And here was the world, polished, glittering, dripping with wealth. But it wasn't hers anymore. It had been handed to a stranger in a red dress. The runway itself was eerily private. No reporters, no crowds, just the faint roar of distant jets taking off. The isolation made the confrontation even sharper. There would be no one to shield Elena if things turned violent, no press to soften Damien's behavior. Here, on this secluded strip of asphalt, Damien believed he was untouchable. But luxury can't mask rot. As Elena walked closer, every step echoing on the concrete, she felt the contrast burning inside her. The jet was meant to symbolize victory, but tonight it felt like a cage, one she was about to rattle until it collapsed. Damien's guards shifted uneasily as she approached, their polished shoes reflecting the lights. They were used to blocking paparazzi, not a pregnant wife. They glanced at each other, unsure whether to stop her. But Elena didn't pause. Her hand rested protectively on her belly, her eyes locked on the door of the jet. Inside, Sienna was already sipping champagne when she caught sight of Elena through the window. Her smirk widened, her laughter turning sharp. "She followed you here?" she sneered to Damien. Pathetic. Damien's expression hardened. He wasn't panicked anymore. He was annoyed. "Stay here," he muttered, standing to confront Elena. He descended the stairs like a king, interrupted, his jaw tight. The air on the runway was heavy, charged with the tension of wealth colliding with betrayal. Elena could hear the faint hum of the jet's engines warming up, ready to whisk Damien and Sienna into the sky. The sound was mocking, like the drumbeat of her humiliation. Still, she stood tall. Around them, the luxurious setting only heightened the cruelty of the moment. The soft glow of the cabin lights, the expensive champagne bubbling inside, the scent of jet fuel mixing with Sienna's perfume, all of it formed a surreal stage. Elena wasn't just confronting a husband, she was stepping into the belly of his empire, daring to challenge the illusion he had built. The flight attendants whispered nervously. The guards shifted again. The moment stretched thin, like glass ready to shatter. Damien stopped in front of her, his voice low and dangerous. "You shouldn't be here." Elena's reply was quiet but steady. Neither should she. She tilted her chin toward the jet, where Sienna now leaned in the doorway, smirking like a queen mocking a dethroned rival. The atmosphere thickened. The jet loomed like a silent witness, its polished surface reflecting their broken marriage. Every detail of the setting, the luxury, the power, the isolation, was conspiring to make Elena look small. But she refused to shrink. And then it happened, the moment that would define everything. Sienna descended the steps, her heels clacking, her red dress glowing under the lights. She walked straight up to Elena, the expensive carpeting of the staircase giving way to the cold concrete beneath her. And with one swift, cruel motion, she grabbed Elena's hair. The jet, the runway, the luxury, all of it faded into the background as gasps erupted. The attendants froze, the guards hesitated, Damien shouted, but the setting itself became the perfect stage for scandal. The private jet, once a symbol of Damien's untouchable power, now stood as a backdrop to the ugliest betrayal imaginable. And as Elena stumbled under the assault, clutching her belly to shield her unborn child, the truth crystallized in the cold night air. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about survival, dignity, and the courage to fight back against a world designed to silence her. What none of them knew was that someone else had already arrived on the runway, and he carried the power to turn this glittering stage into Damien's downfall. Damien Torres had built his empire on two things: charm and ruthlessness. To the outside world, he was the self-made billionaire who had turned a small charter company into one of the most powerful private aviation firms in the country. He was the man investors lined up to meet, the one newspapers praised as a visionary, the one who appeared on magazine covers with headlines like "The King of the Skies." But beneath the polish, Damien was a man consumed by hunger. Success was never enough. Love was never enough. He needed more. More power, more attention, more admiration. And when admiration faded at home, when Elena's quiet strength became inconvenient, he sought it elsewhere. That hunger had led him straight to Sienna Cruz. Sienna was the embodiment of everything Damien thought he deserved. Young, fiery, and reckless enough to stroke his ego without question. She had started as his assistant, fetching coffee and arranging meetings, but she was ambitious, her eyes always scanning for opportunity. It didn't take her long to realize that the fastest path to power wasn't through hard work, it was through Damien. She flirted, laughed at his jokes, made herself indispensable. Soon, their late-night strategy meetings turned into something else. When Damien first invited her onto the jet, she knew she had won. It wasn't about love. For Sienna, Damien was a stepping stone, a ticket into a life of luxury she had only ever seen on Instagram. For Damien, Sienna was a mirror that reflected back the image of the powerful man he wanted the world to see. Together, they were toxic. He craved adoration, she craved status, and in their hunger, they destroyed everything in their path. Elena was the most obvious casualty. Damien no longer saw her as the woman he once courted with flowers and whispered promises. He saw her as an obstacle, a weight dragging him down. He resented her pregnancy, even though he had once begged for a child. He resented her simplicity, her refusal to dress in glittering gowns and parade herself like Sienna. He resented that she reminded him of who he had been before the empire, hungry, unpolished, human. Sienna fed that resentment like gasoline on fire. "Why do you keep her around?" she would sneer, her lips brushing his ear after one of their nights together. "She's weak, she's boring, she's dragging you into mediocrity. Look at us, Damien. We could be unstoppable." And Damien listened. He let her poison drip into his veins until he believed it. He convinced himself that Elena wasn't worthy of him anymore, that she should be grateful for the scraps of his attention, that he had the right to flaunt his mistress because he had earned it. That was the man Elena faced on the runway, the man who had traded his vows for vanity. He descended the steps of the jet with the arrogance of a king, glaring at Elena as though she were trespassing on property that no longer belonged to her. Behind him, Sienna followed with a predatory smile, her red dress glowing like a warning sign. "Go home, Elena," Damien snapped, his voice low and cold. "This isn't the place for you." But Elena didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her hand protectively on her belly. "Home?" she said, her voice trembling but steady. "The home you abandoned? The one you traded for champagne and cheap thrills?" Sienna laughed, loud and cruel, tossing her hair back as though Elena's words were nothing but comedy. "Oh, please," she taunted. "Look at you, standing here in that pathetic dress, acting like you still matter. You're finished, sweetheart. Damien's mine now." The attendants shifted uncomfortably. The guards looked away, but Damien didn't stop her. He let Sienna step closer, let her smirk twist into venom. And then, in a move so brazen it shocked even him, Sienna reached out and yanked Elena's hair. Gasps filled the runway. Elena stumbled, clutching her belly. The pain was sharp, the humiliation sharper. For a moment the world spun, the jet looming behind them like a monument to betrayal. Damien finally stepped forward, but not to defend Elena. Instead, he grabbed Sienna's wrist, not to stop her cruelty, but to control it. "Not here," he hissed, glancing at the attendants and guards. "Not in front of them." The words cut deeper than the pull of Sienna's hand. Damien wasn't angry because Elena had been hurt. He was angry because someone might have seen. That was who Damien Torres had become, a man more concerned with appearances than his wife, his unborn child, or his own humanity. And Sienna thrived on it. She leaned into him, whispering loud enough for Elena to hear. "She'll be gone soon, and then you'll be free, completely free." Elena's breath came ragged, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known Damien was unfaithful. She had suspected his cruelty. But seeing it laid bare, seeing the man she once loved stand silently while another woman hurt her, was worse than any nightmare she had imagined. Yet even in that moment of devastation, something inside her sparked. Because while Damien and Sienna saw this jet as their stage, Elena realized it was also their trap. Their arrogance had blinded them. Their cruelty had made them careless. And standing just beyond the circle of lights was a man with the power to turn their empire upside down. Lucas Vega. The lawyer's shadow stretched across the runway as he stepped forward, his briefcase gleaming under the floodlights. His voice carried like a gavel striking wood. "Enough." Damien turned, his arrogance faltering for the first time that night. Sienna blinked, caught off guard. The attendants froze. sensing that something monumental was about to happen. Elena straightened, her hair disheveled, her body trembling, but her spirit refusing to bow. And as Lucas's eyes met hers, she felt the weight of months of pain begin to shift. For the first time, she wasn't alone. Because what Damien and Sienna didn't know was that Lucas wasn't just carrying legal papers. He was carrying their downfall. The runway was supposed to be private, but privacy never truly existed in Damien Torres's world. Even here in the midnight quiet of the private airstrip, eyes were everywhere. Flight attendants, bodyguards, maintenance staff, and even the drivers waiting near the cars. Whispers traveled fast, and in the age of cell phones, scandals had a way of leaking like water through cracks. When Sienna yanked Elena's hair, the gasp that followed wasn't just from one throat. It rippled, multiplying, feeding on itself. A flight attendant pressed her hand to her mouth. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. Even the chauffeur at the end of the runway took a step forward, curiosity etched on his face. Elena's cry of pain hung in the night air. She stumbled, clutching her belly, terrified not just for herself but for the fragile life inside her. The humiliation was brutal. Not behind closed doors but under the cold, fluorescent floodlights, in front of strangers who would carry this story far beyond the airstrip. Sienna smirked, her grip still tangled in Elena's hair. "You see?" she hissed, her voice sharp and deliberate, meant for everyone to hear. "This is what happens when you cling to a man who doesn't want you. You don't belong here. You never did." The words cut Elena deeper than the physical pain. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, pitying, judging. Her face burned with shame, her chest tightening until she could hardly breathe. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a public execution of her dignity. Damien's voice broke through the chaos, low and furious. "Sienna, enough." He finally pried her hand away, but not out of compassion. His eyes darted around, calculating, already worried about how this would look if someone talked. "You're making a scene," he hissed under his breath. Sienna scoffed, tossing her hair back. She made the scene by showing up. Then she looked Elena up and down, her smile cruel. "Look at you, pitiful, pregnant and abandoned. Did you really think he'd stay faithful? To you?" The attendants looked down, unable to meet Elena's eyes. The guards remained stiff, waiting for orders that never came. In the silence, Elena's humiliation grew unbearable. For months, she had hidden her pain behind closed doors. She had cried into pillows, whispered apologies to her unborn child, and convinced herself she could endure. But tonight, there was no hiding. Her suffering was exposed, raw and unfiltered, for the world around her to see. Her voice trembled as she tried to speak. "Damien, how could you?" Damien avoided her gaze. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, but he said nothing. In that silence, the truth was louder than any denial. Sienna stepped closer, her red dress catching the light like fire. "Because he doesn't love you anymore. He loves me. And the sooner you accept it, the easier this will be." The words hit Elena like a dagger. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the glowing jet behind them. She wanted to scream, to fight, to claw back the pieces of her shattered dignity. But the weight of exhaustion, betrayal, and pregnancy pressed down on her until her knees threatened to buckle. Her humiliation was complete. Not only had Damien betrayed her, but he had allowed his mistress to degrade her in public, to rip away her last shred of pride. And yet, as the floodlights glared and whispers swirled, a spark of defiance flickered deep inside Elena. She had walked into this nightmare alone, but she wasn't leaving alone. Because just then, a new voice rang out across the runway. "Enough," Lucas Vega declared again, louder this time, his tone sharp as a blade. Every head turned. The lawyer's presence shifted the atmosphere, like a storm rolling in. He stepped closer, his briefcase in hand, his eyes locked on Damien. "This ends now, not tomorrow, not in some hidden court, here." Damien's mask of control slipped, panic flickering across his features. "Lucas, what the hell are you doing here?" Lucas ignored him. He turned to Elena, offering her a steady hand. "Mrs. Torres, you don't have to endure this another second." His voice was calm, authoritative, the kind of voice that silenced rooms. Sienna scoffed, trying to laugh it off. "What is this? Some kind of stunt?" Lucas's gaze cut to her like ice. "Miss Cruz, I'd suggest you step back, because the evidence in this briefcase will not only strip Damien of his credibility, but expose every dollar he spent on you. Hotels, jewelry, flights. It's all documented." The murmurs grew louder. The guards shifted again. One of the attendants whispered something to another, eyes wide. The humiliation that had been Elena's moments ago now began to slide toward Damien and Sienna. Damien tried to bluster. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Lucas smiled coldly. "Don't I? Do you really want me to read the receipts aloud? Because I assure you, everyone here will listen." The silence that followed was deafening. Damien's empire, his image, his carefully curated mask, it was all teetering on the edge of collapse, right there on his own runway. Elena, trembling, finally found her voice. Her humiliation hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. For the first time, she realized she wasn't powerless. She looked at Damien, her eyes steady through her tears. "You broke me in private, but tonight, everyone sees the truth." Her words landed heavier than Sienna's insults, heavier than Lucas's threats. They stripped Damien bare, exposing the hollow man behind the wealth. The runway, once a stage for his pride, had become his downfall. The attendants would talk, the guards would talk, the story would spread, and Damien couldn't stop it. And Elena, though humiliated, was no longer just a victim. She was the woman who had survived the ultimate public betrayal. But the night wasn't over, because humiliation was only the beginning. What Elena didn't know was that Lucas's evidence contained a secret so explosive it would not only end her marriage, but also put Damien's entire empire on the verge of collapse. The night after the runway incident stretched endlessly. Elena sat curled on the edge of her bed in the penthouse that no longer felt like home. The city skyline glittered outside the windows, mocking her with its neon lights and restless energy. The hum of Manhattan carried on as if nothing had happened, as if her world hadn't just collapsed in front of strangers. She still felt the sting on her scalp, where Sienna's fingers had torn through her hair. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flash of cameras, the widening eyes of the staff, the smirk on Sienna's face, the cold detachment in Damien's eyes. She had replayed it 100 times in her mind, each time wishing she had screamed louder, fought harder, or at least held on to her dignity. But she hadn't. She had crumbled. Now alone in the cavernous silence of the penthouse, Elena felt like a ghost haunting her own life. The baby inside her shifted, a gentle reminder of the future she had promised to protect. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The nursery down the hall mocked her with its unfinished perfection. Tiny onesies hung neatly in the closet. The crib sat ready, draped in soft blankets she had chosen with such care. It was supposed to be a room filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and lullabies. Instead, it felt like a tomb for the dreams she had buried. Elena broke down in sobs, her shoulders shaking violently as tears soaked the silk pillow beneath her. She thought of the girl she used to be, the ambitious architecture student, the dreamer who wanted to leave her mark on the world. Where had that girl gone? When had she become nothing more than a prop in Damien's empire, discarded the moment she became inconvenient? Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, shattering the silence. For a brief second, she thought it might be Damien apologizing. Foolish hope clawed at her chest, the same hope that had kept her chained for months. But when she glanced at the screen, it wasn't him. It was her mother. "Elena, sweetheart, I saw something online. Are you okay?" Her mother's voice cracked through the receiver, warm and worried, carrying the familiar accent of the small town Elena had once called home. For years, Elena had hidden her struggles, insisting she was fine, painting a picture of a perfect marriage. Tonight, she couldn't keep up the lie. "No, Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm not okay. I don't know what to do anymore." Her mother tried to soothe her, but Elena's sobs drowned out the words. She ended the call, ashamed, terrified, and utterly broken. Hours passed in fragments. Elena wandered from room to room, unable to rest. She sat on the bathroom floor at one point, hugging her knees, the cold tiles pressing against her skin. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. Red-rimmed eyes, tangled hair, pale skin stretched tight over trembling features. She barely recognized herself. The humiliation had carved into her like a knife. She had been stripped of her pride, her safety, her marriage. All that remained was despair. At one point, she opened the balcony doors and stepped outside, the city roaring beneath her. The night air was sharp, almost cruel against her skin. She gripped the railing, staring down at the lights far below. For a fleeting, terrifying second, she thought about letting go. Not because she wanted to die, but because she felt like she already had. But then the baby kicked, a tiny, insistent movement, as if reminding her of the life inside her. Elena gasped, tears streaming anew. She whispered hoarsely, "No, I can't. I have to stay. For you." She sank to the balcony floor, clutching her belly, sobbing until exhaustion dragged her into a restless sleep. When morning came, sunlight flooded the penthouse, too bright, too cruel. Elena awoke with swollen eyes, her body heavy with grief. The world hadn't ended. Damien hadn't returned. Sienna's laughter still echoed in her head, and her humiliation was already spreading beyond the runway. Her phone buzzed again, this time messages from acquaintances, former friends, even distant relatives. Some sympathetic, others curious, all of them reminding her that her private pain had become public gossip. "Saw the video. Are you okay?" "I can't believe Damien let that happen." "Stay strong, Elena." Each message was another twist of the knife. The story was out. She wasn't just a betrayed wife anymore. She was the betrayed wife, the woman whose humiliation had been captured under floodlights and whispered into the world. Elena collapsed back onto the bed, covering her face with trembling hands. She didn't want pity. She didn't want whispers. She wanted her life back, but it felt impossible. That afternoon, Lucas arrived. He didn't knock softly. He knocked firmly, as though refusing to let her hide. Elena opened the door, her eyes swollen, her hair unkempt. She tried to speak, but words failed. Lucas looked at her, his expression steady but softened with compassion. "You don't have to keep pretending you're strong," he said gently. "Not today." Those words undid her completely. She broke into tears again, collapsing into his arms like a child. Lucas didn't push her away. He didn't tell her to stop crying. He just held her until the sobs slowed. When she finally pulled away, ashamed, he met her eyes. "Elena, you have every right to grieve. But don't let them convince you this is the end. You're stronger than you think. And when you're ready, we'll fight." Elena shook her head. "I can't. I'm not like them. I don't have money, power, influence. What am I supposed to do?" Lucas set his briefcase on the table, his gaze unwavering. "You have the truth, and that's more dangerous than anything Damien owns." Elena swallowed hard, his words settling into her. For now, she still felt broken, fragile, barely able to breathe. But deep down a seed had been planted, one that would grow slowly, painfully, until it became unshakable. For the moment, however, all she could do was sit in silence, clutching her belly, trying to remember how to breathe again. What she didn't realize was that Damien's arrogance had already left cracks in his empire, and very soon those cracks would split wide open. For 2 days after the runway incident, Elena barely left her bed. Her body ached from crying, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. Food had no taste. The only thing anchoring her was the baby's steady movements, the gentle proof that life was still inside her even when everything else felt dead. But on the third morning, Lucas returned. He didn't come with flowers or sympathy. He came with a leather briefcase, a look of purpose, and a voice that brooked no argument. "Elena," he said firmly, stepping into the penthouse as though he owned the place, "it's time." She sat up slowly on the couch, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "Time for what? To humiliate myself in court, the way I did on the runway?" Lucas placed the briefcase on the table and clicked it open. Neat stacks of documents filled the inside, along with a flash drive glinting like a tiny weapon. "No," he said. "Time to take back everything Damien stole from you. And more." Elena's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." Lucas leaned forward, his tone steady but urgent. "Damien thinks he's untouchable. He thinks flaunting Sienna in public is his biggest risk, but he's wrong. What he doesn't realize is that his arrogance has left a trail I've been following for months." Her heart pounded. "A trail?" "Financial records," Lucas explained, sliding a stack of papers toward her. "Receipts, wire transfers, offshore accounts. Every dollar he spent covering up this affair, every illegal business deal he thought no one would notice. Damien hasn't just betrayed you, Elena. He's broken the law. And when the truth comes out, it won't just be a divorce. It'll be the end of his empire." Elena stared at the papers, her hands trembling. Rows of numbers blurred before her eyes, but the meaning was clear. Damien had been funneling company money to finance his indulgence with Sienna, lavish trips, jewelry, designer clothes, all disguised as business expenses. Tears stung her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation. They were something sharper, harder. "You mean he's vulnerable?" Lucas nodded. "Very. If we present this evidence strategically, not only will you win the divorce, but you'll walk away with control of assets he never thought you could touch. You've been living as though you're powerless, Elena. But the truth is, you hold the match that can burn down his entire kingdom." Her breath caught. For months, she had felt like nothing more than a shadow, erased by Damien and mocked by Sienna. But now, staring at the evidence, a flicker of strength sparked inside her. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "But I don't know how to fight him. Damien has money, lawyers, influence, and me? I'm just—" Her voice faltered. Lucas cut her off. "You're not just anything. You're his wife. You're the mother of his child, and you're the woman he underestimated. That's your power, Elena. He never saw you coming." The word settled into her like steel. For the first time in months, her spine straightened, her shoulders lifted. She touched her belly, whispering almost to herself, "For us. For the baby." Lucas watched her carefully, then slid the flash drive across the table. "This contains everything. If you're ready, we'll move forward. But once we do, there's no turning back. Damien will fight dirty. He'll try to destroy you." Elena met his gaze, her eyes clear despite the tears. "He already tried, and I survived." Lucas gave the faintest smile. "Then let's make him wish he never underestimated you." That afternoon, Elena began to see her world differently. The penthouse, once a prison, now felt like evidence. Every photograph of Damien with his arm around her, every champagne flute left on the counter, every unopened box of luxury jewelry, it all looked like exhibits in a case against him. She walked into the nursery, her hand trailing over the crib. For the first time, instead of despair, she felt determination. "You'll never grow up in his shadow," she whispered to her unborn child. "Not if I can stop it." Meanwhile, across the city, Damien was oblivious. He sipped expensive whiskey in his office, bragging to associates that Elena was too weak to fight back, too dependent on him to survive. Sienna lounged nearby, scrolling through her phone, basking in the glow of her victory. "She'll beg to come back," Damien sneered, echoing his arrogance. "They always do." But his laughter was hollow, his empire already trembling beneath him. That evening, Elena returned to Lucas's office. He laid out a strategy: the divorce petition, the financial records, the witnesses willing to testify. Piece by piece, he built a case that was no longer about humiliation, but about justice. As the sun set, Elena signed the first document, her pen steady. The sound of the ink scratching across the paper felt like thunder in her ears. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the storm. Lucas leaned back, studying her. "You know, Elena, in all my years as a lawyer, I've seen two kinds of women. The ones who break and the ones who rise. Do you know which one you are?" Elena looked at him, her jaw firm. "I'm the one who rises." It wasn't just bravado, it was truth. The quiet, submissive wife had died on that runway. What remained was someone new, someone Damien and Sienna would never recognize until it was too late. Still, Lucas's warning lingered in her mind. Damien would fight dirty. He wouldn't surrender easily. He would use everything, money, lies, influence, to protect his empire. The road ahead wouldn't just be painful, it would be dangerous. But for the first time, Elena welcomed the danger. She had been humiliated, broken, nearly destroyed. Now it was her turn to rise from the ashes. What neither she nor Lucas knew was that Damien had already set his own counterstrike in motion, and the next battle would unfold not in court, but in front of the entire world. The days after Elena signed the first set of legal documents were unlike anything she had ever known. For months, she had been drowning in despair, her spirit crushed under Damien's betrayal and Sienna's cruelty. But now, for the first time, she felt something entirely new: momentum. It began quietly. A morning when she woke and realized she wasn't crying. An afternoon when she walked past the mirror and, instead of recoiling from the stranger in her reflection, she lingered. She saw the pain, yes, the swollen eyes, the pale skin, the exhaustion etched into her face, but beneath it she glimpsed the woman she used to be, the one who had dreams, ambition, and strength long before Damien Torres entered her life. Lucas noticed it too. Each time they met to discuss the case, he saw the shift in her posture, the steel creeping back into her voice. One afternoon, as they spread documents across his office desk, he said quietly, You don't even realize it, do you? You're changing. Elena looked at him, puzzled. Changing how? You're standing taller, Lucas replied. Speaking louder, fighting harder. You're not the woman who walked onto that runway trembling. You're becoming someone Damien won't recognize until it's too late. His words settled into her chest like a spark catching fire. The transformation wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. Elena decided to reclaim herself piece by piece, starting with her appearance. She called her friend Marisol, a stylist she hadn't seen in years, someone she had drifted away from while living in Damien's shadow. Marisol arrived at the penthouse with racks of clothes and a sharp tongue. "Look at you," she said, hands on hips, shaking her head. "Damien drained the life out of you, didn't he? But don't worry, we're bringing it back." For hours, they tried on outfits, sleek dresses that hugged Elena's figure without hiding her pregnancy, tailored coats that commanded attention, bold colors she hadn't dared to wear since her college days. When Marisol swept Elena's hair into a new style, soft waves cascading down her shoulders, Elena hardly recognized herself. "Now," Marisol said, spinning her toward the mirror, "this is the woman who doesn't beg for scraps. This is the woman who takes what she deserves." Elena stared at her reflection. The timid housewife was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, sharper, alive with quiet fire. The next step was her mind. Lucas had insisted she attend strategy meetings, not just to listen, but to speak. At first, Elena hesitated, overwhelmed by legal jargon and business terms she barely understood. But as the days passed, she realized something shocking. She was good at this. Her years of managing Damien's galas, balancing guest lists, and smoothing over crises had honed a skill she had never acknowledged. She could read people, anticipate moves, and find weaknesses. One evening, as Lucas outlined Damien's likely counterarguments, Elena interrupted. "He won't use that approach. He'll try to manipulate sympathy, make himself look like the abandoned husband. That's what he's always done. Twist the story until he's the victim." Lucas blinked. "You're right, and if we expose that tactic before he can use it, he'll have nothing left to stand on." It was the first time Elena felt like more than a client. She felt like a strategist, a fighter, an equal. Still, the nights were hardest. She would sit in the nursery, her hand on her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "I'm doing this for us, so you'll never have to live in someone else's shadow, so you'll know your mother fought for you." Those whispers became her mantra. Each day she grew stronger, more determined. Then came the gala. It wasn't just any gala, it was the gala, the same annual charity event where Damien had first flaunted Sienna on his arm. This year, Damien had been invited again, of course, but so had Elena. Through her connections with Lucas and Marisol, she had secured a seat at one of the most coveted tables. The moment was too perfect to ignore. If Damien wanted to flaunt his mistress in public, Elena would appear in public too. Not as the humiliated wife, but as the woman reborn. The night of the gala, Marisol helped her dress. Elena wore a gown of deep emerald silk, the fabric flowing over her pregnant belly like liquid strength. Her makeup was soft but powerful, highlighting the sharpness of her cheekbones and the fire in her eyes. When she looked in the mirror, she barely breathed. "You're radiant," Marisol whispered. "He won't see you coming." When Elena arrived at the ballroom, conversations hushed. Heads turned. Whispers followed her as she walked, each step steady, deliberate. No one saw the trembling that still lingered in her hands. They only saw the woman who had survived public humiliation and returned more powerful than ever. Across the room, Damien froze. His glass of champagne slipped in his hand, his smirk faltering for the first time. Sienna at his side stiffened, her nails digging into his arm. Elena didn't falter. She let their eyes meet across the glittering room. For once, it was Damien who looked small, and Elena who stood tall. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and the murmur of wealth, but beneath the surface, a new battle was beginning. This wasn't about appearances anymore. It was about reclaiming dignity, power, and destiny. And as Elena glided through the crowd, her emerald gown sweeping behind her, she knew the time for hiding was over. The woman who had been broken on the runway was gone. What no one in that ballroom knew was that Elena wasn't just there to be seen. She was there to deliver the first public strike against Damien Torres. The ballroom glittered under chandeliers that seemed to drip with gold. The air buzzed with wealth, whispers, and the faint strains of a string quartet. It was the kind of night Damien Torres lived for, the perfect backdrop to flaunt his success, his mistress, and his arrogance. He entered the gala arm in arm with Sienna, her red gown hugging her body like a weapon. Cameras flashed as though they were royalty. Damien smirked, savoring the attention. He thought tonight was his victory lap, the final proof that Alina was nothing but a discarded shadow of his past. But then, Alina arrived, conversations hushed, heads turned. She walked into the ballroom in her emerald silk gown, her pregnant belly proudly on display, her chin high, her eyes steady. She glided across the marble floor like she belonged there. Because she did. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the room. Damien's smirk faltered, his grip on Sienna tightening. Sienna stiffened, her eyes narrowing with instant hostility. Alina didn't rush. She moved with measured grace, greeting acquaintances, shaking hands, her presence impossible to ignore. It was a performance, yes, but also a revelation. She wasn't the broken wife from the runway. She was something new, something untouchable. The whisper spread quickly. That's her. Damien's wife. Did you see the video? She looks incredible. She's glowing. She's not hiding. Every glance, every murmur chipped away at Damien's confidence. This was his world. Yet tonight, the spotlight had shifted. Dinner was served. The clinking of silverware echoed through the hall as servers moved gracefully between tables. Damien and Sienna sat near the front, basking in the glow of attention, though Damien's eyes darted nervously toward Elena's table across the room. And then it happened. The host, a polished socialite with a microphone, stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate generosity, resilience, and the power of truth. She paused, her smile widening. It is my great honor to welcome someone who embodies all three, Mrs. Elena Torres. A ripple of shock coursed through the room. Damien stiffened. Sienna's jaw dropped. Alina rose slowly, every movement deliberate. Her emerald gown shimmered under the lights as she climbed the stage, her presence commanding silence. She stood at the podium, her hands steady, her voice clear. "Thank you," she began, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "Tonight, I stand not as a victim, but as a woman who has learned the cost of silence and the power of speaking the truth." The room leaned in. "I was humiliated," Alina continued, her voice unwavering. "On a runway, under floodlights, by the very people who once vowed to protect me. My dignity was ripped away, my child's future mocked. But I am here tonight to tell you, I am not broken." Murmurs rose. Cameras flashed. Damien's face turned ashen. Alina reached into her clutch and pulled out a small envelope. She held it up for all to see. Inside this envelope is proof of betrayal, of embezzlement, of lies hidden behind luxury. For months, Damien Torres funneled money from his company into private indulgences. Money meant for employees, for investors, stolen to finance affairs and extravagance. Gasps filled the ballroom. A journalist in the back leapt to his feet, already recording. Elena's gaze locked on Damien. "You thought I would remain silent. You thought I was weak. But the truth has a way of finding its voice." Sienna grabbed Damien's arm, hissing, "Do something." But Damien sat frozen, sweat beating at his temple, his empire crumbling in real time. Alina laid the envelope on the podium. "Tomorrow morning, this evidence will be delivered to the courts and the press. Tonight, I place it here so you all understand. What you saw on that runway was not weakness. It was the beginning of justice." The applause began slowly, one pair of hands, then another, until the room thundered with approval. Guests rose to their feet, some cheering, others whispering furiously. The tide had turned. Damien stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. His voice cracked through the noise. "You think you've won? You think this changes anything?" Elena met his eyes calmly. "It changes everything." Sienna tried to pull him back down, but Damien shook her off. His mask was slipping, desperation leaking through. He pointed a trembling finger at Alina. "You'll regret this. You don't know who you're dealing with." But his threats only made him look smaller. The room was no longer his stage, it was his trial. Elena stepped away from the podium, her shoulders straight, her head high. She wasn't afraid anymore. Every whisper, every camera flash, every pair of eyes followed her, not with pity but with respect. Sienna hissed to Damien, "She's ruined you." And Damien, for the first time, had no reply. Elena returned to her table, her hand resting on her belly. The applause still echoed, a wave of vindication crashing over her. She had turned her humiliation into power, her silence into thunder. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The gala was her strike, but the war wasn't over. Damien was cornered, and cornered men were dangerous. Because even as Elena savored her victory, Damien was already planning his next move, one that could risk everything she had just gained. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and tension. Reporters swarmed outside, cameras flashing like lightning. The scandal had erupted after the gala, spreading across headlines and social media like wildfire. Damien Torres, the man once hailed as a titan of aviation, was now facing not only divorce, but also charges of fraud and embezzlement. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. On one side, Damien sat with his high-priced lawyers, his jaw clenched, his tailored suit unable to hide the sweat beading on his forehead. Beside him sat Sienna, no longer glowing in luxury gowns but looking frayed, her confidence cracked. On the other side sat Elena, calm and poised, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Lucas stood beside her, his presence solid, steady, like a shield. The judge entered, the gavel striking wood. Silence fell. For days the trial unfolded like theater. Witnesses testified, accountants, employees, even former associates who admitted Damien had used company funds for personal indulgences. Each piece of evidence Lucas presented was another nail in Damien's empire. Hotel receipts, bank transfers, private jet manifests with Sienna's name scribbled across them. Elena listened quietly, her heart pounding but her expression serene. This was no longer about humiliation, it was about justice. Damien's lawyers tried everything. They painted Elena as hysterical, unstable, even manipulative. They claimed she had fabricated evidence that Lucas had coerced witnesses. But each time, Lucas countered with calm precision, producing documents, recordings, undeniable facts. On the third day, Damien himself took the stand. His arrogance returned in flashes, his voice booming as he declared himself innocent, painting Elena as a bitter wife seeking revenge. For a moment, he even smirked, convinced his charm could sway the room. But then Lucas asked the question that shattered it all. Mr. Torres, can you explain why company funds were used to pay for a 5-star Paris hotel suite under the name Sienna Cruz, the same week your wife was hospitalized for pregnancy complications? The courtroom gasped. Elena's breath caught, tears stinging her eyes. Damien stuttered, his mask slipping. I don't recall. Lucas pressed forward, his voice like steel. You don't recall? Because we have receipts and surveillance footage and testimony from hotel staff. Would you like me to read the details aloud? Damien's face turned ashen. The smirk vanished. For the first time, the mighty billionaire looked small. The judge's gavel struck again, silencing the murmurs. The damage was done. On the final day, Elena herself was called to the stand. She walked slowly, her emerald dress simple but elegant, her belly round with life. The courtroom held its breath as she took her seat. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. She spoke of the betrayal, the humiliation, the night on the runway when Sienna pulled her hair while Damien stood silent. She spoke of the nights she cried alone, the moments she thought she wouldn't survive, the baby that kept her anchored when everything else fell apart. I am not here out of revenge, she said, her voice steady. I am here because no woman, no wife, no mother should be treated as disposable. I gave up my dreams, my career, my independence for a man who saw me as nothing. But I am not nothing. I am enough. And tonight, I stand not just for myself, but for every woman who has been silenced. The courtroom erupted in applause, though the judge quickly banged the gavel for order. But the message was clear. Elena had won more than just sympathy. She had won respect. The verdict came swiftly. Damien Torres was found guilty of financial misconduct, ordered to surrender a significant portion of his assets. The divorce was finalized on Elena's terms. She was granted custody of the child, ownership of the penthouse, and a share of the company's stock that once symbolized Damien's dominance. Sienna, her reputation shattered, slipped out of the courtroom with photographers chasing her. The woman who once gloated on runways and in luxury suites was reduced to scandalous headlines and whispers of betrayal. Damien, meanwhile, sat motionless, his head in his hands. The man who had once strutted through galas and boardrooms now faced not only financial ruin, but the collapse of his empire. When it was over, Elena stepped outside the courthouse. The flash of cameras blinded her, reporters shouting questions, microphones thrust toward her face. For a moment, she hesitated. The old Elena would have shrunk, hidden, let others speak for her. But the woman she had become lifted her chin, her voice calm and steady. "I came into this courthouse as a wife who was betrayed," she said. "I leave as a woman who chose dignity, who chose truth, who chose to rise. This victory is not just mine, it belongs to anyone who has ever been silenced. To every woman who has ever been told she is not enough. You are enough. Always." The crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously, but Elena didn't linger. She turned, walking past the chaos, her hand resting on her belly, her eyes shining with quiet strength. Later that evening, she sat in the nursery. The crib, once a reminder of despair, now felt like a symbol of hope. She placed her hand on the soft blanket and whispered to her unborn child. "We made it," she said softly. "You and me, we made it." For the first time in months, Elena smiled. Not the fragile smile of survival, but the radiant smile of freedom. The kind of smile that comes when you know the worst is behind you and the best is still to come. The city lights twinkled outside her window, no longer mocking her but celebrating with her. She wasn't the broken wife on the runway anymore. She was Elena Torres, the woman who stood against betrayal, who fought for her child, who rose from humiliation to triumph. And as she whispered her final vow to her unborn baby, one truth rang louder than all the rest. Women are never weak when they choose to rise. So that's it, my wonderful friends. The story has come to its end. And if you're still here with me right now, it must mean that something in Elena's journey touched your heart in a way that words alone cannot explain. Maybe you've known betrayal. Maybe you've tasted humiliation. Or maybe, like Elena, you've carried silent battles that no one else could see. But here's the truth this story leaves us with. Pain does not define us. Our response to pain does. The Stoics used to say, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius. Elena couldn't control Damien's betrayal, or Sienna's cruelty, or the whispers of society, but she could choose how to rise from it, and she did. Her story reminds us that every collapse can be the seed of transformation. Every humiliation can be turned into strength if we refuse to stay silent. Like the Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Elena reacted not with revenge alone, but with dignity, with courage, and with truth. And that's what gave her back her power. So if you're carrying a heavy burden right now, I want you to remember, you are not broken, you are becoming. And like Elena, you can turn your scars into a crown. My friends, if this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs hope tonight. Hit the like button, share this video with your loved ones, and subscribe to our channel because here, we don't just tell stories. We remind each other of the power we all carry inside. Stay strong, stay true, and never forget, you are enough. Always.